Listen to the wind that sweeps across the vast, undulating dunes of the Sahara. If you quiet the noise of the modern world, if you shut out the frantic, panicked broadcasts of Western media and the shallow debates of politicians, you will hear a frequency that is older than the borders drawn on our maps. You will hear the deep, rhythmic breathing of a continent that is waking from a long, troubled slumber. The Sahara Desert is not a barren wasteland, nor is it a wall that divides the north of Africa from the south. It is an ocean of sand, a repository of frozen time, a silent witness to the greatest civilizations that have ever graced the face of the earth. Beneath this red and golden dust lies the memory of Kemet, the land we now call Ancient Egypt, and the spiritual electricity that once raised the Great Pyramids. The cosmic energy that aligned the temples with the stars did not vanish when the empires fell. It did not evaporate into the atmosphere. It merely retreated deep into the bedrock of the continent, waiting patiently in the dark for the turning of the cosmic wheel. Today, that wheel has turned. The ancient energy of Kemet is rising once again, vibrating with a terrifying and beautiful intensity. But it is not rising in the modern streets of Cairo. It has traveled beneath the earth, following the ancestral ley lines, to erupt in the heart of the Sahel. It has manifested in the dusty, sun-baked avenues of Ouagadougou, Bamako, and Niamey. When we look at the phenomenon of Captain Ibrahim Traoré, we are conditioned by the modern world to see a military leader, a head of state, or a transitional president. But for those who possess the ancestral eye, for those who can read the spiritual mathematics of the universe, the truth is far more profound and far more dangerous to the established global order. We are not watching a mere political transition. We are witnessing the resurrection of an ancient archetype. We are watching the return of the Black Pharaoh, sent by the cosmos to restore the sacred balance of the world. To comprehend the magnitude of the spiritual mission assigned to Ibrahim Traoré, we must first understand the two most fundamental concepts of ancient African cosmology, the twin pillars upon which the universe of Kemet was built, Isfet and Maat. In the sacred texts of the Nile Valley, Isfet represented chaos, violence, injustice, deception, and the exploitation of the weak. It was the demonic force of disorder, embodied by the giant cosmic serpent Apep, who sought every night to swallow the sun god Ra and plunge the world into eternal darkness. Isfet is the disruption of the natural order. Now, take a spiritual lens and look at the history of the African continent, and specifically the Sahel, over the past 400 years. What do you see? You see the transatlantic slave trade, the arbitrary carving up of nations at the Berlin Conference, the theft of gold, uranium, and human potential. You see the imposition of the CFA franc, a currency designed to keep the children of the soil in perpetual economic bondage. You see the funding of proxy wars and terrorism by foreign intelligence agencies to justify endless military occupation. You see puppet leaders, installed by foreign capitals, who wear expensive suits while their people starve, and selling their birthright for pieces of silver. What is this? This is absolute concentrated Isfet. The Western empires, in their quest for endless material accumulation, became the modern avatars of the serpent Apep. They brought the spirit of chaos to the continent and arrogantly called it civilization. They brought economic strangulation and called it development. They brought spiritual darkness and called it enlightenment. For generations, the cosmic scales were tipped entirely into the abyss. The weight of the suffering, the blood crying out from the soil, created a massive spiritual deficit. But the ancient priests of Kemet knew a universal truth: Isfet cannot rule forever. The universe is a self-correcting organism. It demands balance. This divine balance is called Maat. Maat is the principle of truth, justice, harmony, reciprocity, and cosmic order. It is the light that pierces the darkness. But Maat does not restore itself autonomously. It requires a physical vessel. It requires a champion. It requires a king, a pharaoh who is willing to take up the sword, to stand between his people and the serpent, and to cut off the head of chaos. When the suffering of the Sahel reached its absolute peak, when the foreign armies roamed freely while the local populations lived in terror, the earth itself cried out for Maat. And the universe answered by reaching into the dusty ranks of the Burkina Faso army and pulling forth a young captain. When Ibrahim Traoré stood before the world and declared that the wealth of his nation belongs solely to the people of his nation, he was not merely outlining an economic manifesto, but he was speaking the words of power, the ancient Heka. He was performing a high spiritual ritual of Maat. Every time he tears up a neo-colonial mining contract, every time he expels a foreign ambassador who acts like a viceroy, every time he demands that the gold of the Sahel remains in the Sahel, he is literally placing the feather of truth back onto the cosmic scales. He is neutralizing the Isfet that has plagued his land. He is pushing back the serpent. The historical and spiritual parallels to the great Black Pharaohs of the 25th Dynasty of Egypt are so staggering that they cannot be ignored. Over 2,700 years ago, the great empire of Egypt had fallen into decay. It was fractured, corrupt, and ruled by weak local leaders who were easily manipulated and bullied by the aggressive Assyrian Empire from the north. But the center of power had lost its spiritual mandate. Who came to save the empire? It was not the elites of the capital. It was the Kushite kings from the deep south, from modern-day Sudan and Nubia. These were men of dark skin, fierce warrior spirit, and uncompromising devotion to the gods. They rode north from the dust and the heat to restore order to a chaotic world. The greatest of these Kushite saviors was Pharaoh Taharqa. Taharqa did not come to conquer Egypt. He came to heal it. He expelled the foreign invaders. He rebuilt the ruined temples, and he restored the dignity of the people. He was a warrior of the earth who saved the jewel of the continent. Look closely at Ibrahim Traoré. He has emerged from the south of the global neo-colonial order. But he did not come from the elite political classes groomed in the universities of Paris or London. He came from the dust, from the heat of the battlefield, from the rank and file of those who actually bleed for the soil. He is the modern incarnation of Taharqa. The Western powers look at him and see a terrifying threat to their hegemony, exactly as the Assyrian Empire looked at Taharqa and saw a threat to their dominance. Why do they fear him so deeply? Because empires built on the foundation of Isfet cannot survive in the presence of a leader who embodies Maat. The frequency of truth is toxic to the architects of deception. We must also decode the profound, hidden symbolism of his uniform. To the uninitiated, the red beret he wears is simply a piece of military headgear, a designation of his unit. But in the realm of spiritual symbology, nothing is accidental. In ancient Egypt, the pharaoh wore the Deshret, the red crown of Lower Egypt. The color red in Kemet was complex. It was the color of life, of blood, of the setting sun. But most importantly, it was the color of the protective, consuming fire of the goddess Sekhmet. Sekhmet was the lioness deity, the fierce eye of the sun god, who was unleashed to destroy the enemies of truth and to protect the righteous. By wearing the red beret, Traore has, whether consciously or guided by the invisible hands of the ancestors, crowned himself with the modern Deshret. He carries the fire of Sekhmet upon his head. The enemies of the Sahel, the corrupt politicians, the foreign extractors, the sponsors of terror, are feeling that terrifying fire right now. They are burning under the intense or unforgiving heat of a sovereignty they can no longer control or purchase. The red dust of Burkina Faso has merged with the red crown of the pharaoh, creating an impenetrable shield of spiritual authority. Furthermore, observe the manner in which he speaks. Traoré does not use the deceptive, flowery, diplomatic language of the Western world, a language designed to hide intentions and mask exploitation. He speaks with brutal, absolute, undeniable truth. In the Egyptian Book of the Dead, there is a central, terrifying ritual known as the weighing of the heart. When a soul enters the afterlife, it is brought into the hall of two truths. The god Anubis places the soul's heart on one side of a cosmic scale, and on the other side, he places the feather of Maat. If the heart is heavy with lies, corruption, and the suffering of others, when the soul is devoured by a demon. If the heart is light and pure, the soul enters paradise. Traoré is forcing the leaders of the modern world into the Hall of Two Truths. When he stood at the Russia-Africa Summit in St. Petersburg, looking directly at the assembled leaders of the world, and asked the piercing question, why is the continent with the most wealth the poorest continent in the world? He was performing the weighing of the heart ritual on a global scale. He laid bare the hypocrisy of the international system. He took the heavy, dark heart of Western imperialism and placed it on the scale next to the feather of African truth, and the world watched as the scale tipped violently. This is the voice of the Pharaoh, a voice that does not ask for permission, a voice that aligns the physical reality with the spiritual law. But he is demanding that the global order account for its sins against the children of the sun. The Dogon people of Mali, whose deep astronomical and spiritual wisdom we explored previously, have always known of this unbroken connection. The Dogon themselves migrated from the Nile Valley centuries ago, carrying the secret knowledge of the Sirius star system with them to the cliffs of Bandiagara. The current, unbreakable spiritual and military alliance between Mali and Burkina Faso, the brotherhood between Assimi Goïta and Ibrahim Traoré, is not merely a geopolitical treaty. It is the cosmic reunion of the Dogon twins. But looking through the lens of Kemet, it is something even grander. It is the reassembly of Upper and Lower Egypt. It is the unification of the earth element, represented by the stoic, silent strength of Goïta, and the fire element, represented by the passionate, burning velocity of Traoré. Together, they are recreating the complete, unified, impenetrable African empire. They are binding the two lands together so tightly that no foreign wedge can ever drive them apart again. For centuries, we have been told that the Sphinx is asleep. The great monument of Giza, with the body of a lion and the head of a man, has lain silent in the sand, its nose broken by the artillery of conquerors who sought to erase the black identity of the ancients. The colonizers thought that by breaking the statues, by stealing the artifacts and locking them in the museums of London and Paris, they had destroyed the spirit of the people. But the Sphinx is not a statue made of limestone. The Sphinx is a state of consciousness. It is the collective, a dormant power of the African soul. Today, we are witnessing the waking of the Sphinx. The youth of the Sahel are opening the eye of Horus. In the mythology of Kemet, The eye of Horus, the Wedjat, represents awakening, protection, healing, and the restoration of what was shattered. When millions of young Africans take to the streets of Ouagadougou, Bamako, and Niamey, waving their flags, rejecting the lies of the colonial media networks, and standing as a human shield to defend their captain, they are collectively activating the eye of Horus. They are finally seeing through the complex illusions of the modern Babylon matrix. They are recognizing their own power. They are recognizing their pharaoh. The spirits of Kemet are rejoicing in the ancestral realm. And the gold that was stolen and shipped away in the dark is being reclaimed in the light of day. The artificial borders drawn with a ruler by men who hated Africa in the drawing rooms of Berlin are being erased by the marching boots of a united generation. The cosmic balance is being violently and beautifully restored. This is a message to the powers of the West, to the architects of the old world order. Your time of Isfet has come to an end. You came to the continent with chaos. You ruled through division. But you have finally met the unbreakable wall of Maat. You cannot sanction the rising sun. You cannot assassinate a constellation. You cannot defeat a man who is the physical embodiment of a spiritual law. The more you struggle against the turning of the wheel, the more you will be crushed beneath its weight. And to the children of the continent, and the millions of the diaspora scattered across the Americas, the Caribbean, and Europe. Do not look at this revolution through the small, limited lens of modern politics. Do not let the vocabulary of CNN or the BBC define what you are witnessing. Look at it through the grand, eternal lens of your ancestors. The bloodline of the pharaohs did not vanish into the dust of antiquity. It did not die out. It disguised itself. It hid in the villages. It survived the slave ships. It endured the colonial whips, and today, it has dressed itself in camouflage fatigues and a red beret to finish the war that began thousands of years ago. The ancient wisdom has returned to the Sahel. The scales of justice are balancing before our very eyes. The red crown is secure on the head of the chosen vessel. What if your soul vibrates with the truth of the ancients? If you recognize the spirit of Maat operating in Captain Ibrahim Traoré, you must not remain a silent witness. The energy of this awakening requires your active participation. Hit the like button to feed the algorithm with the frequency of truth, forcing the machine to spread the message of the ancestors. Share this video to open the eye of Horus for someone who is still sleeping in the dark. Subscribe to this channel, because the mysteries are unfolding more rapidly every single day. We are not just reporting the history of the world, we are decoding the prophecy of the new earth. The desert remembers its past. The pharaoh has returned to his people, and Africa is finally, permanently unchained.